No, Senator, there has been no change. We are now entering the 96th hour. Dr. Alastair Finch pinched the bridge of his nose, the sleek, minimalist design of his office suddenly feeling like a cage. The voice on the other end of the line was smooth, political, and utterly unhelpful. We have tried every protein source imaginable: raw bison, cooked duck, even a specially formulated nutrient paste from Germany. We've used appetite stimulants, pheromone diffusers, and auditory therapy. The result is the same: nothing. He paused, listening to the platitudes about funding and public image. With all due respect, sir, public image won't matter if we have a $7 million facility full of dead heroes. These aren't just dogs, they're national assets, and they are, for all intents and purposes, choosing to die. He ended the call with a curt, frustrated sign-off, the silence of the room pressing in on him. It was a beautiful silence, an expensive silence, engineered with acoustic panels and triple-glazed glass. But outside his door, another kind of silence reigned, a heavy, mournful quiet that had haunted the kennels for 4 straight days. The facility was his masterpiece. The K9 Valor Retirement Sanctuary was the culmination of his life's work, a testament to modern animal behaviorism. It was a sprawling campus of brushed steel, polished concrete, and temperature-controlled habitats, funded by a consortium of grateful defense contractors and impassioned lobbyists. Here, the nation's most elite military working dogs were meant to decompress, to transition from the battlefield to a life of quiet dignity. And the first 7 arrivals, the inaugural residents, were the best of the best. 7 Belgian Malinois, legends from a classified unit known only as Spectre Pack. They had arrived together, a coordinated transfer from a military base in Ramstein. From the moment they stepped off the climate-controlled transport, something was wrong. They moved with a spectral grace, their amber eyes holding a deep, unnerving stillness. They obeyed commands, entered their state-of-the-art kennels without protest, and then, as one, they had simply stopped. They lay on their orthopedic beds, heads on their paws, breathing shallowly. They refused water unless it was brought directly to their mouths, and they had not eaten a single bite of food. Finch, with his 2 PhDs and a bookshelf groaning with awards, was stumped. His data was useless. His methodologies, which had successfully rehabilitated hundreds of traumatized animals, failed to elicit even a flicker of response. These dogs were not sick, not injured. They were, in a word he loathed for its imprecision, heartbroken. They were grieving, but his understanding of grief was based on the loss of a single handler. This was different. This was a collective, synchronous despair that defied every textbook he'd ever read. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his tailored suit feeling like a costume. He was a scientist, a man of logic and reason. He dealt in observable phenomena and repeatable results. And before him lay a problem of the soul, a silent 7-fold protest he could not begin to comprehend. His frustration was a living thing, coiling in his gut. He was failing, and he was failing on the biggest stage of his career. Down the hall, in the gleaming kennel block, Maya Torres moved quietly from one enclosure to the next. A former Army combat medic, she was volunteering at the sanctuary while she waited for her nursing school application to be processed. She didn't have Finch's academic pedigree, but she had spent 6 years in places where the line between life and death was drawn in sand and sweat. She recognized the look in the dog's eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was the look of a soldier who has received a final, irrevocable order to stand down. It was the look of a unit that had lost its commander, and with him, its purpose for existing. She checked their gums for dehydration, spoke to them in a low, soothing voice, and felt their profound stillness seep into her own bones. While Finch saw a behavioral puzzle, Maya saw a catastrophic failure of morale. These weren't pets missing their owners. They were warriors whose war was over, and no one had told them what to do next. It was she who had made the call, digging through old contacts, pulling a long-shot favor, and getting a name from a grizzled old sergeant major who had simply said, "If anyone can talk to him, he can, if you can find him." Finch had been furious when she told him. A farmer? You called a farmer? Maya, this is a multi-million-dollar biobehavioral institute, not a petting zoo. We need experts, not folk wisdom. His condescension had been sharp, but his desperation was sharper. He had, after a tense argument, agreed. Fine, let your old man come and wave a magic wand, but when it doesn't work, we proceed with my protocol. Intravenous feeding and sedation. I will not lose these animals. Maya hadn't argued back. She just nodded, praying that the man she had summoned understood what she had seen in those amber eyes. She knew with a certainty that chilled her that if these dogs were fed by force, their bodies might live on, but the magnificent, fiery spirits within them would be extinguished for good. The silence in the kennels was not an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was the sound of 7 hearts beating in a slow, steady march towards the end. The old pickup truck that rattled up the pristine asphalt driveway of the sanctuary looked like a rust-colored fossil from a bygone era. It coughed to a stop, the sound an affront to the facility's serene, curated atmosphere. The man who climbed out was a perfect match for his vehicle. He was tall but stooped, wearing faded denim overalls over a plaid flannel shirt, with a good layer of honest dirt on his worn leather boots. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles carved by sun and time, and his hands, as he rested them on the open truck door, were thick with calluses and scarred across the knuckles. He looked like he had just stepped out of a field, which, Maya knew, he had. Dr. Finch met him at the entrance, his expression a carefully controlled mask of professional courtesy that did little to hide his profound skepticism. He extended a manicured hand. "Mr. Keene? I'm Dr. Alistair Finch. Thank you for coming." Samuel Keene took the offered hand. His grip was firm, dry, and surprisingly powerful. He didn't offer a folksy pleasantry or seem intimidated by the imposing modern building. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, weren't looking at Finch or the impressive architecture. They were scanning. His gaze swept the perimeter, noted the camera placements, the tree line, the access road. It was an unconscious, economical assessment of the terrain, the kind of thing a man does when his survival has often depended on it. Finch, oblivious, launched into his practice speech. As I'm sure Ms. Torres explained, we're facing a unique challenge. We have 7 Belgian Malinois, all retired from active duty, exhibiting profound anorexia and depressive behaviors. We've ruled out all physiological causes. My working hypothesis is a severe, compound manifestation of separation anxiety from their handlers. He gestured for Keene to follow him, leading him down a hallway that gleamed with sterile perfection. We've created a state-of-the-art environment here, optimized nutrition, climate control, positive reinforcement protocols. Everything is data-driven. But they simply refuse to engage. Keene said nothing. He just walked, his stride long and deceptively slow. Maya noticed it immediately. He didn't shuffle like an old man. He moved with an incredible economy of motion, his back ramrod straight despite the slight stoop in his shoulders. It was the walk of a man who had spent a lifetime carrying a heavy pack over uneven ground, a walk designed to conserve energy for a destination that was always miles away. As they approached the kennel block, the heavy, silent grief of the place met them like a physical wave. Finch paused before the first glass-fronted enclosure. Inside, a magnificent dark-furred Malinois lay perfectly still, its gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the far wall. "This is Aries," Finch said, tapping a tablet to bring up the dog's stats. Record of over 200 successful missions. He's been completely unresponsive. Keene didn't look at the tablet. His eyes were on the dog. He studied the slight tension in the animal's haunches, the precise angle of its ears, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of its chest. He was not looking at a depressed pet. He was reading a status report. He moved to the next kennel, and the next, and the next. 7 times he stood before a different dog: Chaos, Fury, Ghost, Reaper, Stalker, and Wraith. 7 legends, now reduced to silent, breathing statues. Finch continued his monologue, his voice filled with clinical jargon about neurotransmitters and cortisol levels, a desperate attempt to assert his expertise in the face of this quiet, unimpressive farmer. We've attempted to stimulate their prey drive with motion toys, their social drive with recordings of their handlers' voices. Nothing. It's a complete psychological shutdown. It's fascinating from a clinical perspective, but utterly tragic. Keen remained silent, his weathered face unreadable. Maya walked a few paces behind, watching the interaction. She saw how Finch talked at Keen, seeing only a cliché of rural simplicity. But she also saw how Keen wasn't really listening to Finch. He was listening to the silence. He was absorbing the atmosphere of the room, reading the invisible signals that Finch's expensive sensors couldn't detect. He was a man accustomed to a different kind of data, the kind that tells you whether the rustle in the grass is the wind or something far more dangerous. After he had observed the last dog, Wraith, Keen finally turned away from the kennels. He looked at Finch, his pale blue eyes direct and devoid of judgment. "You said they came from Ramstein?" Finch blinked, caught off guard by the simple, factual question. "Yes, that's correct. A direct military transport." Keen nodded slowly. "And before that?" Finch frowned, swiping through his tablet. "Their service records are heavily redacted, of course. All it says is Special Operations Command, K9s. Outside the continental United States. Why is that relevant?" Keen's gaze drifted back to the dogs. "Everything is relevant, Doctor." His voice was quiet, raspy from disuse, but it held a strange resonance in the acoustically perfect room. It was a voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. He then began to ask a series of questions that seemed, to Finch, utterly bizarre and disconnected from the problem at hand. "What's the barometric pressure in here?" Keen asked, his hand resting lightly on the wall, as if feeling for a vibration. Finch stared at him. "It's standard atmospheric pressure, 1,013 millibars, give or take. The entire facility is pressure stabilized." Keen nodded. "Air changes per hour." 12, Finch answered automatically. "It's a hospital-grade HVAC system." "What direction do these kennels face?" "They face east," Finch said, his tone dripping with impatience. "We designed it so they get the morning sun. It's supposed to help regulate their circadian rhythms." "Mr. Keen, I fail to see how any of this." Keen held up a calloused hand, not rudely, but with an authority that was so innate Finch stopped talking mid-sentence. "Morning sun is for hunting," Keen said softly, more to himself than to Finch. "Afternoon sun is for rest. They're on a perpetual morning alert. They can't stand down." He walked to the central aisle of the kennel block, positioning himself exactly in the middle. He stood there for a long moment, his eyes closed. He was like a human tuning fork, sensing the dissonant frequency of the place. Maya watched, mesmerized. She saw what Finch couldn't. She saw the way Keen's worn boots were planted, perfectly balanced. She saw the controlled, diaphragmatic breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of a man completely in command of his own body. It was the composure of a sniper in a hide, or a scout on a long, lonely reconnaissance mission. It was a stillness that was not passive, but intensely active and aware. The dogs began to react. It was almost imperceptible at first. Ares, the dark Malinois, lifted his head a fraction of an inch. Fury's ear twitched, swiveling to pinpoint the old man's position. Down the line, one by one, 7 pairs of amber eyes slowly shifted, moving from the empty space in front of them to focus on the quiet figure in the center of the room. They weren't looking with curiosity or hope. They were looking with a flicker of recognition, the way a dormant computer terminal flickers to life when it detects a familiar command prompt. They sensed a presence that understood their language, a language that had nothing to do with treat-dispensing toys or soothing music. Finch saw the movement, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his professional armor. He looked from the dogs to Keen and back again. What are you doing?" he whispered, afraid to break the spell. Keen didn't open his eyes. "They're not waiting for their handlers," he said, his voice still quiet, but now filled with a profound sorrow. "They're waiting for their pack leader. And he's not coming." He finally opened his eyes and looked at Finch, and in their pale depths, the doctor saw a flicker of a world he couldn't imagine, a world of dust and fire and impossible choices. These dogs weren't assigned to individual soldiers, Doctor. That's the old model. Spectre Pack was an experiment. 7 dogs, 1 pack. They worked in unison, controlled by a single handler. They weren't just his weapons, they were his family. His pack. They ate together, slept together, fought together. They were one living organism with 8 heartbeats. Finch was stunned into silence, his mind racing. A single handler unit of that size. The psychological bonding required would be immense, the potential for catastrophic failure equally so. It was a radical, dangerous concept. How could you possibly know that? That information, it's not in any file. It would be classified at the highest levels. Keen's gaze was steady. Because I helped Captain Evans design the training protocol. I taught him how to think like a wolf, not a man. I told him it would either be the most effective tracking unit in the history of warfare, or it would break his heart. A shadow of immense pain passed over Keen's face. Looks like it broke theirs instead. He took a deep, centering breath, the kind of breath a man takes before stepping into the breach. Captain Evans was killed in an IED blast 2 months ago, he said, his voice flat, declarative, stripped of all emotion. The dogs were there. They were medevaced out, separated for debriefing and evaluation, and shuffled through the system until they ended up here. As far as they know, their leader is gone, and the pack has been shattered. The mission is over. So they are shutting down. It's the most honorable thing they know how to do. The truth of it landed in the sterile room with the force of a physical blow. Finch felt the blood drain from his face. All his science, all his data, had been focused on the wrong problem. He had been treating 7 individual cases of depression, when he should have been treating 1 pack suffering a mortal wound. He looked at the dogs, truly seeing them for the first time, not as assets or patients, but as a single, grieving family. And then he looked at Keen, the quiet farmer who saw it all in a single glance. "Who are you?" Finch breathed. The question filled with a new, desperate respect. Keen didn't answer. Instead, he straightened his back. The stoop vanished. The years seemed to fall away. He was no longer a simple farmer, but something else entirely. Something forged in a crucible Finch could only guess at. He was radiating an aura of calm, absolute authority. He stood at what Maya instantly recognized as a perfect parade rest. The dogs felt the shift. Every single one of them was now on their feet, not barking, not whining. They stood in their kennels, alert and utterly focused on him, their bodies taut with anticipation. A current of energy, electric and palpable, now flowed through the room, connecting the 7 dogs to the 1 man. Keen let the silence stretch, allowing the tension to build until it was almost unbearable. He was taking command, not through force or dominance, but through a shared understanding, a common language of discipline and purpose. He was re-establishing a chain of command that had been broken by violence and bureaucracy. He took one more slow, deliberate breath. Then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was a command voice, a tone that expected and received instant, unquestioning obedience. He didn't use English. He used a short, guttural phrase in Dutch, the language in which most Malinois are first trained. Aandacht. Attention. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. 7 heads snapped to attention. 7 pairs of ears locked forward. 7 bodies squared, muscles tensed, ready for the next command. It was a symphony of conditioned response, a beautiful, heartbreaking display of their ingrained training and loyalty. Finch let out an involuntary gasp. Maya felt tears well in her eyes, a lump forming in her throat. She was witnessing something sacred, a resurrection. Keen held them like that for a full 10 seconds, his gaze sweeping over them, acknowledging each one. He was reforming the pack, right here, right now, with nothing but his voice and his presence. Then, his tone softened, shifting from the hard edge of command to something deeper, something that sounded like a quiet promise. He switched to English, his voice now imbued with a gentle, gravelly warmth that was both an order and an absolution. "Come on, boys," he said, the words simple, almost conversational. "Chow time." For a moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as one, the 7 dogs broke their rigid stance. There was no wild rush, no frantic energy. Instead, with the solemn, deliberate purpose of soldiers following a long-awaited order, they turned to the stainless steel bowls that had sat untouched for 4 days. The silence was broken by a new sound, the gentle, rhythmic clinking of dog tags against metal bowls, the soft, earnest sound of lapping and chewing, the sound of life, of hope, of a pack that had found its center once more. It was the most beautiful sound Alistair Finch had ever heard. He stood, humbled and awestruck, watching his greatest failure transform into his most profound lesson. He had tried to fix them with science, but this old farmer had healed them with something far more powerful: understanding. The dogs ate with a steady, determined focus, cleaning their bowls with methodical precision. When they were finished, they didn't lie back down in their state of mournful lethargy. Instead, they sat, looking toward Samuel Keene, their expressions calm, their bodies relaxed but attentive. They were waiting for their next order. The crisis was over, but the new reality was just beginning. Finch finally found his voice, though it was shaky and thin. "Captain Evans, you said you trained him." Keene nodded, his gaze still on the dogs, a universe of memory in his eyes. "He was one of the best I ever had, a natural. The dogs knew it. They wouldn't have followed him like that if he wasn't. He used to say that phrase every night before feeding. 'Come on, boys, chow time.' It wasn't just about food. It was his way of telling them the perimeter was secure, the mission for the day was done, and the pack was safe under his watch. It was there at ease. The simplicity and the depth of it were staggering. Finch's complex protocols and behavioral algorithms seemed like a child's scribbles next to the elegant, powerful truth of that simple phrase. It was a key, and only the man who had helped forge the lock knew how to turn it. I am so sorry," Finch said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I was arrogant. I saw a set of data points, not a family. I never would have figured this out." Keene finally turned to look at him, and there was no trace of "I told you so" in his expression. There was only a weary empathy. "You see with your head, Doctor. It's a good head, a smart one. But these boys," he gestured to the kennels, "they see with their hearts. You have to learn their language. It's a language of loyalty, of duty, and of absolute trust. They don't give it lightly, but once given, they will follow it to the ends of the earth." Maya stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Keene. You saved them." Keene gave her a small, sad smile. "They're not saved yet, ma'am. They're just listening again. They've accepted a field promotion, you might say, but they need a new CO, a real one. Someone who understands what they've lost and what they still have to give." His eyes moved back to Finch, and his expression became serious, assessing. "This is a fine facility, Doctor. You built them a good barracks. But a barracks isn't a home. A leader is a home." Finch stood taller, a flicker of new resolve in his eyes. The scientist was receding, and a different man was beginning to emerge. One who understood that some things couldn't be quantified. "Teach me," he said, the request raw and genuine. "Please, teach me how to be the leader they need. I don't know the first thing about their world, but I am willing to learn." Samuel Keene studied him for a long time, his pale blue eyes seeming to look right through Finch, weighing his sincerity, his capacity, his heart. He saw the stripped-down humility that had replaced the academic arrogance. He saw the dawning of true understanding. He looked at the 7 magnificent dogs, now resting peacefully, their faith momentarily restored by a familiar voice. They had given their entire lives in service, and they deserved more than a quiet end in a sterile box. They deserved a purpose. They deserved a pack. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, Doctor, we can try." He walked over to the kennel where Aries was sitting, the powerful dog watching his every move. He didn't open the door, but simply rested his hand against the glass. "Lesson 1, Keene said, his voice low and steady, for Finch's ears only. "You are not their caretaker. You're not their friend, and you're not their therapist. You are their commanding officer. Your posture, your tone of voice, the way you breathe, it's all part of your first command. That command is, you are safe with me. I will not fail you. Every single thing you do from this moment on must reinforce that command. Finch moved to stand beside him, mirroring his stance, his eyes not on Keen, but on the dogs. He was no longer looking at a problem to be solved. He was looking at his new unit, at his profound and solemn responsibility. The air in the sanctuary was still quiet, but it was no longer a heavy, mournful silence. It was a silence filled with purpose, a silence ready and waiting for the next command. The healing had just begun.